All right, let's dive right into this explainer and shatter a pretty massive illusion, the idea that human history is just this neat, straight line of progress. I mean, we've all been taught the standard narrative, right? The story goes that humanity marched perfectly from ancient myths, found organized religion, then kind of graduated to philosophy, and finally arrived at the ultimate destination, modern science. But as we're going to see today by unpacking some incredibly fascinating historical research, that neat, straight line, it's a complete myth in itself.
So instead of that clean ladder of progress we all learned in school, the actual fascinating reality of history is way more like a branching tree of continuous, messy competition. An older way of thinking absolutely doesn't just vanish the second a new one pops up. Religion, philosophy, science, they actually coexist. They compete, they cross-pollinate, and honestly, sometimes a parent idea even tries to aggressively suppress its own descendant. It's a highly dynamic evolution, definitely not a one-way street.
To really wrap our heads around this nonlinear history, we need to grasp one core concept, and that is cumulative consciousness. It sounds heavy, but it's basically just humanity's way of preserving knowledge while constantly transforming it at the exact same time. Think of it like updating your smartphone's operating system. The new version inherits the core code of the older one, right? But it differentiates from it, mixes in some new features, and yeah, sometimes it deletes outdated apps entirely. Because of this dynamic, you can literally have a civilization making massive leaps in mathematics while simultaneously shrinking in philosophical freedom.
Part 1. The universal search for order, solving the cognitive problem. So let's look at how this builds, because underneath all these ancient systems lies one absolutely fundamental, shared human challenge.
Since the literal dawn of time, human cognition has been desperately trying to answer one single question when faced with the chaotic, endless diversity of the universe. And that question is, how is multiplicity organized? We look out at millions of different events, right? The stars, animals, totally random human behaviors, and our brains inherently just beg to find the pattern. We are obsessively searching for that one rule that compresses the chaos into something we can actually understand. To do this, our brains naturally compress that chaos by moving through a few very distinct steps. We start with overwhelming multiplicity, then we try to find a relation between things. We use that to build an organization, and boom, finally we arrive at order. And humanity has done this using all sorts of different tools over millennia. Myths did it through wild narratives and family trees of gods. Religions organized things through sacred hierarchies. Philosophy tackled it through abstract principles. And science? Well, science tests those relational models against actual observation. But structurally, deep down, it is the exact same human reflex, finding unity in all that noise.
Moving on to Part 2, Global Laboratories of Thought, looking at different regions and different models. Instead of a dry history lesson, let's treat the ancient world as a series of giant cognitive laboratories that tackled this search for order in totally vastly different ways.
The initial starting points in places like Greece, Iran, India, and China birthed entirely unique ecosystems of reasoning. For example, in Greece, having polytheism meant there wasn't just one centralized truth dictating everything, which naturally encouraged debate and a search for underlying natural principles. Then you look at ancient Iran, where Zoroastrianism placed a huge emphasis on a unified cosmic moral order called Asha, which paved the way for deep traditions of wisdom and illumination. Meanwhile, China focused heavily on relational order. Think concepts like the Tao and cosmic harmony, which birthed incredibly practical, ethical, and analogical styles of reasoning.
Now, here's where it gets super interesting. We so often just assume religion is inherently anti-science, right? Well, India is the ultimate proof that math and mysticism can, and absolutely did, evolve right alongside each other. India generated some of the world's most intense traditions of meditation and direct spiritual realization, while at the exact same time developing mind-bendingly sophisticated logic, algebra, and astronomy. It totally shatters the idea that a society has to choose between having a sacred metaphysics and utilizing formal, rigorous reasoning.
So, bringing us to Part 3, the boundaries of reason and epistemic search space. Because if humans are so incredibly good at reasoning, what happens when our reasoning starts to threaten the very order it was trying to protect in the first place?
See, scientific progress isn't just about raw intelligence. It's a recipe that depends on a very specific combination of variables to actually generate and test new hypotheses. You definitely need reasoning capacity for sure, But you also need empirical constraints to actually test your wild ideas, a reliable way to preserve that knowledge for the next generation, and, crucially, you need the political and social freedom to apply your reasoning without being completely shut down by the powers that be.
We can really understand this by comparing the mind's raw horsepower to the actual open road allowed by a given society. You can have incredibly brilliant thinkers, massive, off-the-charts reasoning capacity, but if the institutional or theological boundaries of your civilization declare certain topics completely off-limits, your freedom of reasoning practically shrinks to zero. This dynamic is perfectly embodied by the brilliant 11th century Islamic thinker Al-Ghazali.
Al-Ghazali is fascinating because he used incredibly sophisticated logic not to destroy science, but to strategically construct a boundary protecting divine authority. He didn't just ban math like some brute force dictator, he actually fully recognized its demonstrative certainty. Instead, he used masterful, high-level philosophical arguments to basically say, hey, autonomous reasoning cannot legitimately settle ultimate metaphysical questions against revelation. It's such a profound realization. High-level rational consciousness can actually be utilized as a tool to hit the brakes and restrict its own domain.
Okay, let's pivot from the cosmos down to the streets for part 4. Shaping political consciousness and the physics of social order, because the way we organize the universe directly impacts how we organize our politics.
As civilizations matured, the primary organizational problem started shifting from explaining the stars in the sky to simply surviving each other. The big question shifted from how is reality ordered to how should society be ordered. And just like with those natural laws, humanity went through a very branching, nonlinear evolution of political solutions.
Tracing this evolution of justice is wild. We basically moved from simply crossing our fingers and hoping for a virtuous king to building a complex mechanical network of institutions to protect us when that king inevitably turns out to be corrupt. Back in early advice literature, like the 11th century Persian Mirrors for Princes, the equation was super simple. Justice equals the virtue of the ruler. Educate the king to be good, and society thrives. But over the centuries, culminating in modern constitutional systems, our focus shifted from trusting a centralized person to relying on a distributed network. We woke up and realized we absolutely needed courts, laws, and distributed powers to keep us safe when the ruler is, well, not so good.
To really wrap our minds around how we achieved all of this, we have to look at Part 5, Building Civilizational Memory, humanity's external hard drive. This is all about how knowledge manages to survive the collapse of individual empires and lifetimes. Because, let's face it, human brains die and regimes completely fall apart.
But unlike a single human life, civilization creates this externalized memory. It's literally a relay race, where cognitive breakthroughs are passed down so the next generation doesn't have to start from scratch. A brilliant idea escapes the biological bounds of a single human brain. It becomes speech, then it's written down as a text, housed in a library, institutionalized, and eventually becomes a technology that wires entirely new brains centuries later.
Take the year 499 CE. Aryabhata authored an astronomical treatise in India, essentially creating a mathematical hard drive that would be inherited and vastly expanded upon by generations of later scholars. Once he formalized a mathematical relation, the next generation didn't have to waste time rediscovering it. It's the exact same way open-source software works today. They simply downloaded that externalized cognitive structure, built right on top of it, and passed it along to brilliant mathematicians like Brahmagupta and eventually the whole Kerala school.
So, we don't literally have a giant collective brain floating in the sky acting as our memory, right? But we construct the next best thing. Our collective memory lives in our math, our laws, and our institutions. This means that even when a society suffers a massive local regression or total collapse, the macro trajectory of humanity just keeps expanding because the structural code has already been written and saved. Even if the timeline looks like it's zigzagging or even going backward on a micro level, the large-scale envelope of human consciousness is continuously accumulating, expanding, and transforming.
I want to leave you with these incredibly provocative questions from the source text, challenging us to consider who exactly is defining the boundaries of our reality today. Because, as we've explored throughout this explainer, those last two questions, who gets to define the order and how it may be challenged, are absolutely vital. They are the deciding factor in whether our inherited consciousness becomes an open platform for exciting further discovery or just a strict boundary that restricts our future. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the order.